Hi there, and a very warm welcome to this week's video, which is a little bit of a special one because it only happens one time a year, and this is when a new Octane version drops. So this time Octane 2025.1 dropped for Cinema 4D and for Blender as a stable build. So what we're going to do today is look at the features and how to use them in both of the applications. So without further ado, let's grab your coffee, strap in, and let's get going. If you're new here, welcome to this channel. I'm first of all showing you how to download the shiny new versions. Go to otoy.com, and if you have an active subscription, you log in and go to downloads. Then you are greeted with the new versions, for example for Blender in Windows, Linux and macOS, as well as Cinema 4D, Windows and macOS. Also for packages which I don't cover on my channel as Houdini, for example. So just go to this page, download the version you need, and then install it. Easy as that. This time, as requested by the community, I'm doing one package at a time. So first it will be Cinema 4D, and after that it will be Blender. On screen you can see the features as well as the timestamps. So if you're only interested in one timestamp, you can jump ahead and just watch that. Also, the video chapters on your playhead show the same information. If you want to get access to the scene files I'm using here, as well as all the other scene files that I ever used in my tutorials, I would be delighted to welcome you to my Patreon. Today we are only showing rather small scenes to depict the features, but on Patreon there are rather large scenes as well as this magnifying scene or this circuit board that you are free to use in commercial projects or dissect to understand how I build up my scenes. I'm also delighted to tell you that there are also some freebies in there, as the material ball scene that you can use to test your own materials, as well as use the materials that are provided with it, or have a look inside of them to understand what I'm doing to my materials to make them look realistic. After this long, unfortunately sort of necessary shout out, as economy isn't looking too good, let's look at brighter things and jump into the Cinema 4D bit. Welcome to Cinema 4D land and our trusted Flask scene. If you're an avid viewer of this channel, you might already know that from the time I did go over the new features in the standalone when it still was in beta. Let's have a look at the new decaling system and how you can make them appear on your bottle. For that, we need a material on your bottle, which we already have. And if you go to your live viewer under objects, a Octane Decal. In the Octane Decal, we have some inputs, but the first input name suggests that it is for normals, so we have to add another input, which is then for textures. Let's go to the Octane Decal nodes and then bring in a Octane texture here. Let's drag it into the texture input we just created. What we can also do is duplicate that and go for a alpha, since this image also has an alpha, and then plug that into the opacity. You can go more advanced here by adding more textures or, as we've seen, normal maps, but this decal is already globally available, so we need to grab it through another material that we want the decal to show up on, which is the bottle in our case. So here, let's just bring in the decal node and then drag it in between by holding down Alt. And you can already see there's something happening. In the decal, we want to match the texture that we want to show, which is texture 1 conveniently. But now you can see we have sort of a mismatch here. If I move my decal, you can see it is displayed much more small than it's actually appearing on the bottle. Unfortunately, this is a small bug if you're using a scene scale other than the standard, and if you know me, I'm using millimeters quite often because I'm using smaller scenes and this helps me with the precision. So until the fix arrives, hopefully soon, the workaround is to scale your numbers in the gizmo by the same amount the difference is between your standard scene scale, which is centimeters, and the scene scale you're using, in my case, millimeters. So let's make those 10 times smaller, 10 by 10 by 10, and you can see now the decal is appearing in the same size the gizmo was before. Now for my taste, this is still a little bit big, so let's go with 5 by 5 by 5 here. And you can see it disappeared, but if we go outside of the camera here, this is because it's now outside of the bounding box between the bottle wall and the gizmo. So what we need to do is move the gizmo forward so it intersects again, and there we have our logo again. As a last point, if I would move my bottle, the decal is not moving with it, and the easy fix for that is to include the decal inside of the bottle's hierarchy. So if we do the same thing now, you can see it's now working as expected. Of course, there's more granularity to the decal workflow, so if you're interested in that, I recommend you to watch the standalone video I made on that in the upper right corner right now. And welcome to rest position. Let's make our scene first. So first of all, let's create a Cinema 4D noise this time and plug it into our diffuse. And you already can see our horrid seams that are forming through our projection that is box projected through our tag. Let's switch things a little bit around by going with a blistered turbulence noise and with absolute. If you know me, you know what's coming. We are getting rid of our seams by going with another projection, and this is XYZ2 UVW. This makes our noise quite big, so let's lock the aspect ratio and go with 0.1 here. But what is this? You can see we are now getting stretching, and this is probably a bug and a thing I didn't know for the longest time. You also have to go in here and go with a transform as well. Then also make the transform quite small, like this, and then you have a true 3D noise. Just to be clear, this setup only goes for the Cinema 4D noise. If you use any other noise in Octane, the pure projection just is enough. This is just the ramp up to the feature, so let's go back inside of our camera and you can see we have a seamless noise here. Now I have a twist modifier inside of our object, and if I twist it, you can see this is not what we want. The object is moving through our noise. Now let's finally meet our feature, so let's go back to the twist of 0 here. What we are going to do is go to our topmost hierarchy where the mesh is accumulated under. Then right-click, go to Extensions, Octane Object Tag, and then find the new Rest Position tag. Here you can select from different options. Let's go from Current Frame right now and then Store Rest Position. This turns the icon green. And if we go now to our twist and twist it, you can see nothing has changed. This is because we are missing one initial step. So in our projection, you might have seen this before, there's the Use Rest Attributes. And as soon as we've ticked that, now the noise is sticking to our object as expected. The really amazing thing is that this rest attribute is available for most of Octane's projections, including triplanar, but you don't see it here. You need the triplanar node and then you flap open the transform and have it here. Just as a heads up. If you don't know about triplanar, I also made a dedicated video on this in the upper right corner. And also, if you want to gather a little bit more info about the rest position, I also have a video on that, upper right corner again. And welcome to the realistic camera. I think this is the feature most of you have been waiting for, and also for my sanity, the most easy to explain. On your camera, there should be an Octane camera tag. If there's not, then go to Extensions, Octane, and create it here. If we go to the tag, then you can see we are looking through the thin lens right now. If we roll down that menu, you can see all the options that there are available through Octane, including the universal camera, which I also made a tutorial on. You can find a link in the description down below. Of course, for now, we are interested in the realistic lens, so let's engage, and you can already see there's something changing. To exactly see what, let's go into the realistic tab and twirl open the effects, depth of field, as well as the camera settings. Right now, you can see we are looking through a 100mm lens, and it has some lens characteristics going on. If we twirl down this menu, you can see there are 15 more lenses available. And those are all lenses with their measured characteristics. So if I go for the PET-1 lens, you can see it has a swirly bokeh. There isn't a lot to say about the depth of field section. There's all settings that you know from the thin lens camera, except the custom aperture. So if we go back to our 100mm lens to have a little bit of a bigger circle of confusion, you can now drag in maps for the aperture as well to individualize your lens even more. As you can see, it gets quite dark with this map here, and this is because there hasn't been any brightness compensation added yet. So what you would need to do is go to your Octane settings in the imager, then adjust your exposure accordingly. As you can see now in the lens characteristic, this is now very customized. If you know the universal camera, as soon as you load a aperture map, then everything else is overwritten. So it might come to a great surprise to you that in the realistic lens camera, this works together. So I'm still able to change stuff here, for example, the aperture edge or the bokeh side count, maybe set it to 3 here. It gets a lot darker, but now you can see we have a triangular aperture, while still and also retaining the aperture map. To go further, let's first go back to our initial state. Here we go. And as a cherry on top, a long requested feature, chromatic aberration. Now the slider goes from 0 to 400%, so be a little bit careful dialing it in, otherwise you're getting an alien planet. It depends a little bit on the lens you're using, but in my experience, values from 5 to 10 are a good fit to make the lens realistic and have a good amount of chromatic aberration. Now, of course, all of those settings contribute to your render time, the lens simulation, of course, as well as the aperture map, and then the chromatic aberration. Just know, and this is no surprise, the more you do to your simulated lens, and the more realistic the outcome is, the longer the render times will be. As with the universal camera, the bottleneck here seems to be the aperture map, so if we delete that and then compensate our exposure again, you can see that this is already a lot faster. And you're still getting a very customized bokeh because we are simulating a lens after all. So you can tinker around with it and figure out how much resources you're willing to pay as a tax for a more realistic lens. Again, if you want to get this a little bit more detailed, I have a whole tutorial on this in the standalone, link in the upper right corner or in the description below. I don't know how many upper right corner links I can throw at YouTube. And welcome to our almost empty scene. This is because we are now going to populate it using Vectron. First things first, we have a new shiny menu for Vectron, which houses all the Vectron objects. Now let me create some Vectron objects first, mainly a Vectron box and then also a Vectron sphere. If you have some artifacts on the intersection point, you can mitigate that by lowering the ray epsilon, but let's not do that for now because we can just move the sphere a little bit so we don't get that. I hear you ask, what are Vectron objects? And I say, those are signed distance fields. And now you ask, what are signed distance fields? The easiest explanation would be volumes made into objects. And the whole operation here is that Vectron is a signed distance field operator in which we can do stuff. Let me show you by dragging one of the materials to the box and the other one to the sphere, and you can see those can be applied to those Vectron objects. Also, like other primitive objects in Cinema 4D, they have their own settings. For example, we can round the corner of the cube here like this. Now, let's get to the more interesting operator portion of Vectron. As you can see on top, there are some sort of Boolean operations. So what I want to do is go with the Vectron union. It just grabbed the cube. Also, let's apply the sphere to it. And now you can see what's happening. We have a nice transition between both of those. If we go to the operator, you can see there's a radius slider in which we can adjust the radius here, so we can make it really small or even a lot larger. And as you've noticed, the really interesting part here is that it's not only blending between the objects, but also the textures. You might be surprised to hear that none of this is new and Vectron has existed inside of Octane for years. It's just this overhaul that makes it much more useful inside of Cinema 4D. Let's actually get into the part which is new in this release, which is the Vectron displacement. So what we can do is grab the sphere and move it into the displacement here. If we re-render, we can see that the sphere is now very large. If we now have a look at the displacement object, what we can see is that it has a slot for a texture. Actually, the best way to do that is inside of its nodes. So what I want to do is go with an Octane noise, plug it into the texture here, and then again go to projection and make a XYZ to UVW projection. And you can see it's kind of working already. Let's actually make the displacement height 10 times smaller by adding a 0, then go to the noise and also scale it down. And as those objects are not based on polygons, those can get quite detailed. Now the last bit I'm going to show you here is all of this can be nested. So if I put that back inside of the object here, if we re-render, you should see a nice transition here. As you can imagine, Vectron has quite a bit of room for discovery and therefore exploration, especially since you can take standard polygon objects and with the help of an Octane object tag, convert them into a signed distance field. If you want me to make a dedicated video on Vectron, just let me know in the comments below. And lastly, welcome to Chaos Land, where we have a vastly overhauled chaos texture. Now, going over all the new features would be a tutorial on its own. Luckily, I already did that in the standalone, so upper right corner or description as before. But let's go over the new features in a quick succession here. If you don't know, to get on the same page, a chaos texture is taking in one texture and then chaotically distributing it on a surface to avoid tiling. As a feature for the users to understand a little bit better what the chaos texture is actually doing, we now have a hexagonal tiling grid here. This shows you the grid and the blending in which the texture is randomly distributed. Also, of course, it reacts to the input like transform. If you want to create even more chaos, as this grid for example is too regular for you, then something like enable grid deformation comes into play, which with the grid noise weight you can use to deform the grid itself. This is driven from a built-in noise, so if you want to change the noise, you can operate that by the transform here. For example, make it smaller, which gives you a lot of extra options to make those borders indistinguishable. Last but definitely not least, quick swap of scenes to show you one more feature. Before, Chaos Texture was only working on UVs, so you had to fight against seams here. With the new one, it also works with triplanar. So if we bring in a big blending angle, for example 40, the seams are a thing of the past. The only thing you have to remember is to plug in your projection into the Chaos Texture directly, not the texture that is attached to that. The plethora of all the other features you can distill from my dedicated tutorial. By the way, if you're not interested in the Blender part, after the Blender part there's some accumulation of small features and then a benchmark at the end. A very warm welcome to Blenderland. Let's go in the same order and tackle decals first. Other than in Cinema 4D, we don't have a decal object here in Blender, so what we need to do is hit Shift A and create some other objects, for example a cube. 20mm seems fine. If you're wondering why I'm also using millimeters in Blender and how you set up your Blender file to do this, you can watch my Blender for Cinema 4D users tutorial, where I go over all of this. You can also download the layout from there. To make this cube into a decal, we need to go into its dataset, then scroll down, so we find the Octane mesh properties. To activate those mesh properties, we need a material on the cube, so let's create one and actually call it Decal01. We don't need the surface shader, so let's just delete it. What we need is the decal, and not the texture, just the decal. Now we can plug it into any port of the shader, it doesn't matter. And then drag in our Octane logo decal texture. As you can see, other than in Cinema 4D, there's already a texture slot created, so let's plug that in. We also need the alpha, but we don't have a way to change the texture as in Cinema 4D. So Shift A, alpha, alpha image. In here, what we want to do is search for the Octane logo, like this. Now plug that into the opacity, and that's our base setup done. Back in the data section, we need to find the decal part of our texture. Let's link the texture first, which was the Decal01, and then find the decal. Nothing changed, and this is because we need the receiver end on the bottles material. That fortunately is rather easy to do, so let's go to the bottles material, move those nodes to the side a little bit, and then create our decal, in this case our decal texture, and move it in here. As you can see, something changed, but we don't see our decal directly because, similar to Cinema 4D, this is rather large. To get it smaller, let's go to the cube, hit S and then 0.1. And you can see something happened here. I know from trying this before that this is just the wrong orientation, so I go to my object, move up here to the coordinates and go to the X coordinate and rotate it by 90 degrees. And what do you know? There's our logo. Let's move it up a little bit, so 175 here on the Z axis. Before we move on to more scaling, since this is not an object and therefore doesn't have a gizmo, we have a trick here. So in the rendered view, we have a gizmo. If we turn that back on, you can see now we have a gizmo for our decal. Like in Cinema 4D, let's halve the size again, so 0.05. Now it's gone again because it's inside of the bottle. It only appears when the bounding box intersects with the object, so what we need to do is go by -45 here. So we have an intersection with the bounding box of the front of the bottle, and therefore we have our logo. Now if I grab the bottle empty and move it by hitting G, you can see that the logo stays put, which we don't want. So in order to move it with the bottle, let's drag it into the right collection first, then parent it to the bottle by clicking on the cube first, then control clicking on the bottle, go over one of the picture viewers here, then hold Ctrl P to parent. Then choose the Keep Transform without Inverse option. Now this is part of the hierarchy here of the bottle, and if we grab it, you can see now the logo is moving. Very nice. As a last step, let's turn off the gizmo because it would show up in the rendering, which we don't want. And this is it. If you want to have more infos about the decal texture, which I did a tutorial on in the standalone, then you can find the link in the description down below, as I unfortunately used up all my upper right corner pins before. And welcome to Rest Position Blender Edition. To not make it too boring, let's do something different than in Cinema 4D, but also rather the same than always. Let's bring in our Octane logo. Let's connect this texture to the albedo, and you can see now it's using the UVs of the object, which look a bit garbled up, but would actually move with the mesh. What I have in mind is a little bit different, so what I want to do is go to the projection and shift click on it. That lets you choose other projections, which is the XYZ to UVW again. And in there we need to actually create a 3D transform also. Here we go. Now of course you can tinker around, I already know my values here. To actually make us see something, first change the scale to 0.125. Then what we want to do is transform the logo here to 35, 45 and 60. So basically we are camera mapping the logo to our view. Now what I've done here to make this effect visible is create a modifier, and this is a waves modifier. If I turn it on and then hit play or scrub through the time, you can see right now the logo is not moving with the object, as it is just projected on top. To give the object a rest position, I'm turning off the waves modifier again, then go to the object data properties, and here we have it, the rest position. So all you need to do is click that, and Blender Octane is figuring out the rest behind the scenes. Also, of course, as in Cinema 4D, we need to enable it in the shader too. And now if we turn on our waves modifier again, oh, I was looking at the wrong spot, then you can see now the logo is distorted with the mesh. Very nice. And this is essentially all there is to it, just a click of a button here and then enabling it in the shader. And welcome to our realistic lens scene, sponsored by Ferrero Rocher. Of course I'm kidding. In Blender Octane, setting this up is rather easy. First select your camera, then you go to the data tab of your camera, search for the camera type and set it to realistic lens. Easy as that. And immediately you can see there's something going on with the bokeh, and this is because we are simulating a 100mm film lens right now. If we twirl this open, besides this lens you have access to 15 more lenses, for example this 85mm Petzval lens. And this one has a very swirly bokeh. So what we have here is a range of real-world lenses that have been measured, and the data has been brought and integrated into Octane. Since those are fixed lenses, we cannot change the focal length, but what we can change is all of that below. So with the limitations of the lens, for example the f-stop cannot change lower than 1.4 here, Octane tries its best to merge the data you get into it here with the measured lens. If you have keen eyes, you might already have spotted the custom aperture texture that we can use here, same as in the universal camera. To get one in, we need the Octane texture editor. We are already in here, so we could choose that here, then create a quick node tree. Let's select the grayscale color and delete it, and then Shift A and call image and go with the RGB image and connect it to the output here. I already loaded the aperture texture, so let's find it in here, which is this one. So select it, then go over to the realistic lens and load the whole node tree there. This makes the render quite dark because Octane still has no brightness compensation for aperture textures, unfortunately. As a workaround, we can go into the side panel here and in the Octane tab change the exposure accordingly. Hit N to close it again to make the bokeh a little bit more visible. What I want to do is go back to our 100mm film lens. Here we go. I've let this render for a while, so this is the result. Maybe you can still not clearly see the custom aperture here. The reason for that is that other than the universal camera, the aperture map doesn't override all the other settings. So they're actually still at play. The aperture edge, for example, is moving all the energy of the bokeh to its rim. So if we go back to the original value 1, then you might be able to see the bokeh map more clearly. So after some more rendering, this is the result again, and I think you can see the map much more clearly now. Just one more thing to show that those values are not overwritten, what we can do is go to the bokeh here and set the count to 3. And you can now clearly see that it also reflects inside of the render. Let's actually go back to 9 and show you one more thing, which is under Effects, the chromatic aberration. I noticed that this is mapped incorrectly inside of Blender Octane. The range is correct though from the slider, so it goes from 0 to 400, and 400 gives a very alien result. For me, values from 5 to 10% are usually the going to range, but this doesn't change here. So what I actually need to do is go to 0.01 to get to my 10%. And now you can see this looks much more reasonable. Left it rendering a little bit again. This is actually a bit weak, I think, but still you can see the chromatic aberration here, and it gives a nice custom lens effect. Now, as with everything, the more effects you throw onto it, the longer the render time will be. As with the universal camera, the main culprit for the long render time here is the texture. And as you can imagine, the next biggest culprit is the chromatic aberration. The realistic lens camera on itself is quite fast, not as fast as the standard camera, and it also depends on the lens you're choosing. And that's all for the realistic lens camera. So let's next jump to the Vectron displacement. For Vectron and Vectron displacement, as in Cinema 4D, let's start with an almost empty scene. We just have a cube inside here. So the workflow is very similar to the Decal support. What we need to do is fill in some Octane mesh properties. To do this, as with the Decal support, we need a material. Let's deselect it from the input, but keep it this time, so just move it back. So other than in Cinema 4D, and same as in the standalone, Octane Blender's Vectron is completely node-based. Shift A to select the nodes, and then we can go with a union. Shift A again and select a box this time, and then Shift A again and select a sphere. Now let's connect it all together by going to Input 1, Input 2, and this one here goes anywhere, so for example Displacement. To actually see what we've done, let's go to the data section of our cube and then select the right material and the right object here, which is the last one in our line, and this is the union. Now everything went black, and this is because the objects are rather big, so let's go with 0.1 on width, height and depth. And for the sphere, let's go with a 0.05 radius. Now that we finally can see something again, make the cube a little bit more round. So 1 means full roundness. This is a little bit different than in Cinema 4D. So let's go with 0.25 here. Move the sphere outward a little bit. For this, we need a transform. So let's move it to the side and up a little bit like this. And also, while we are at it, the exposure is a little bit bright here. So let's go to the Octane settings yet again. Go to exposure and half that. Something like this. And to flap it closed. And then what we can do, if we move our camera here, then go to our union and move the radius. You can see now we can merge it as in Cinema 4D. To get a displacement going, we need to merge it in here. So Shift A again and then search for the Vectron displacement. So let's put it in here. This makes the sphere bulge. Like in Cinema 4D, let's go with a lower value here. let's hit Shift A again and search for Cinema, then go with a Cinema 4D noise and plug it into the texture slot of the displacement. Like so. Now, as a last step to get the displacement going, we are going with a UVW to XYZ projection, or the other way around, then go for a 3D transformation again. Here we go. Let's actually go with absolute and use Cinema 4D noise here and make the noise a bit smaller, so 0.01 for example. And you can see now we have some displacement going on the sphere. Sorry for the somewhat messy notes here. To finally see the material blending, what we can do is go to the albedo and make it a color, for example purple, and then plug it into either of those objects. Here we go. Of course, this is but a fraction of the capabilities of Vectron, so if you want me to do a tutorial on more stuff that's in there, let me know in the comments down below. Now on with our last chapter, the chaos texture. And welcome to the chaos bit in Blender. This is about the chaos texture that has been overhauled and vastly improved. To get on the same page, let's first show you what the chaos texture is about by tiling down the image texture here, and we can see we have now a repetitive pattern. And this is exactly where the chaos texture comes in. It gives us the same resolution as with our tiles, but takes those tiles and chaotically distributes them. So they're not visible anymore, especially if you go to the rotation and enable that. Let's show you the first of the new features by ticking on the Show Hexagonal Tiling. This is a visualizer mode that shows you the grid as well as the blending the chaos texture is using to distribute the texture. If the grid is too regular for you, we can use another new feature, which is the Enable Grid Deformation. So you can see a lot here. This is because the grid noise weight is very low. If you turn it up to 1, then you get problems. So I opt for 0.5 here. As you can see, this made our grid slightly irregular, but the noise pattern is rather big. So let's make it smaller by going to the Grid Noise Transform, get a transform, and scale down the noise to 0.25. Now you can see the borders are offset, which helps us to avoid eventual tiling. And if a noise is not enough, you can also use a texture in here. While this houses a lot more useful features that I all go over in my dedicated standalone video, the link is down in the description below. What I personally like the most about the new chaos texture, and I have to switch scenes here, that it is, other than the old one that only supported UVs, also supports all sorts of projections, including the triplanar map. So if we turn off the Show Hexagonal Tiling and up the angle here, you can see we have a pretty perfect outcome. Of course, this makes it a great tool on the belt of every procedural texturing artist. Small heads up though, if you're working with the chaos texture and triplanar, you have to connect the triplanar projection to the chaos texture directly and not to the image texture as you're used to. And those are the main features inside of Cinema 4D and Blender. Following this, there's a collage of clips with small features that also made it into the build. So let's carry on. In all of the kernels, the max parallel samples and max tile samples have been raised, so you can go up to 512 now. Be a little bit careful as they take a lot of VRAM. To explain, especially parallel samples are a balance between render speed when you crank it up and conservative VRAM usage if you go to lower numbers. In Cinema 4D, Octane nodes with animations are not longer lost if you copy and paste them. The animation here is retained. All volumes in Octane, such as this VDB cloud, have now a new setting here. This is the ray step increase factor. If you increase the increase factor, it will increase the volume step percent for secondary rays and therefore might render faster. A ray step increase factor of 100 means 2 times the value that is above here. Of course, by increasing that, you might lose detail and therefore quality for your secondary rays. In all Octane versions, a new camera mask AOV was added that records valid camera rays. If we look through it with a normal camera, we only see white, but with a universal camera with optical vignetting, where a lot of rays are not making it through the lens, you can see this is the result there. You, for example, can use it to de-vignette your image in comp. And also, this time in Blender, to not always show Cinema 4D, we have some new blending options in the Compositor context of Octane available. And there's one more thing. I hope I caught all the features, maybe some flew under my radar, but at least I think I caught all the main ones. Now, there's supposed to be some efficiency improvements with the new core, so what I did is what I always do, I made some benchmarks. Let's start with the worst chart first, which is Vram. Small disclaimer, I'm benchmarking the scenes on my workstation where stuff is changing all the time. I do a restart for every benchmarking session though, but what I'm saying is take the results with a grain of salt. So from Octane 2024.1 to the newest version Octane 2025.1, the RAM usage has increased in all the scenes, though in most cases only marginal. If we look at VRAM usage though, it's the complete opposite. There the footprint is smaller in all the scenes, though again only marginal. No big shifts here. And another positive, render times are either the same or lower than before. In the silver caustic caps case, that uses photon tracing quite a bit actually. This is pretty nice to see. Wow, that was quite a bit of work, going through Cinema 4D as well as Blender, then all the small bits as well as benchmarking. That was a very elaborate task. If you're still watching, thank you for staying hooked until now, and maybe you want to give back. I would love to welcome you as a Patreon. The link is down in the description below. Speaking of Patreons, let me give my gratitude to the existing ones. Especially my €50 tier subscribers, Shields Augustinen and Leon Studio TV. Also, of course, a huge thank you for my €15 tier subscribers, Doyim, 4D Thieves, Render King, Alessandro Bonchio, Alessio De Vecchi, Ami Schiedried, BVR, Christian Grajewski, Erbe Plus Academy, Joel Mackimer, John Edward, Chris Clemson, Ness Graphics, Nico Straub, Part 1 of 2, Ralf, Reiko, Reshock, Shamus Johnson, Shiro 2049, Terry Wayne Ranson, and Yassin Rupp. Hi there and welcome to the After Hours. If you watch all the way through, massive congratulations. I'm not sure how many people do that. As I said before, this was a multi-day endeavor to bring all of this together. So thank you very much for your support and watching till the end. Next week is Easter, so I don't think I will make a tutorial then. After that, I will continue with my watch tutorials. So we are going to import our cat data, our cat watch model into Cinema 4D and then do the shading there. I expect the shading to take at least 2 more videos, so prepare for another couple of videos on the watch topic. If you want to help me against the algorithm overlords, then find an emoticon that supports one of the features I presented best and then post it down in the comments below. Again, thank you very much for watching. I keep it very classic today and say happy rendering. Bye!